The instrument panel screamed 3 different warnings before going silent altogether, which Rowan figured was the ship's way of giving up. He'd hauled cargo across 14 systems without incident, and now, over a planet that wasn't even supposed to be on his route, the Halcyon decided to become an expensive meteor. "Come on, sweetheart," he muttered, jamming the manual override. "Don't do this to me." The ship shuddered, nose pitching downward. Through the viewport Zereth, 7 spread below like a wound. Endless rust-colored desert beneath twin suns that hung in the sky like disappointed eyes. The altimeter spun backward with enthusiasm. Rowan had approximately 90 seconds to appreciate the irony of dying while transporting medical supplies. He yanked the emergency descent flaps, which groaned in protest but deployed. The Halcyon stopped dropping like a stone and started dropping like a slightly more aerodynamic stone. The impact scattered his teeth-rattling thoughts across several seconds of violence. Metal shrieked. Something exploded in the cargo bay. His restraints bit deep enough to promise spectacular bruises. Then silence, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and his own ragged breathing. He hung sideways in the pilot's chair, the world tilted at an angle that made his inner ear furious. Blood trickled from somewhere above his left eyebrow. Through the cracked viewport, sand stretched to every horizon. "Well," he said to nobody, "could be worse." Then he saw the other wreckage. Half a mile across the dunes, another ship lay broken, its whole design unlike anything in the Terran fleet. Sleeker, organic curves instead of the Halcyon's utilitarian angles. Smoke rose from its ruptured engine core. Rowan unstrapped with fingers that shook only a little. His emergency kit had survived: water recycler, nutrient packs, medkit, and a distress beacon that blinked a sad amber instead of the confident green of functionality. He grabbed what he could carry and stumbled out into heat that hit like a physical wall. The sand swallowed his boots with each step. Sweat soaked through his flight suit before he'd covered 100 meters. He was muttering creative profanity when he spotted her. She lay in the shadow of her ship's wing, motionless. His first thought was that he'd found a corpse. His second thought, when he got closer, was that she definitely wasn't human. Tall, even sprawled unconscious. Skin the color of amber with an almost luminous quality, like sunlight through honey. Hair dark as space, pooling around her head. And ears elegant, tapering points that extended nearly to her shoulders, twitching slightly with each shallow breath. Rowan knelt beside her, checking for a pulse in a spot he hoped was equivalent to a human neck. There, steady and strong. Relief loosened something in his chest. He'd crashed on a dead planet, but at least he wouldn't die alone. Then he reconsidered whether that was actually comforting. Her eyes snapped open violet, like nothing he'd ever seen, and focused on him with the clarity of someone fully conscious. She said something in a language that sounded like music played backward. "Easy," Rowan said, raising his hands. "I'm not." She lunged upward, and he barely caught her before she collapsed again. Up close, he could see the gash along her temple, the burns on her forearms. Her translator implant, a silver disc behind her left ear, sparked weakly. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we're going to get you to shade before we both cook." She said something else, toned sharp with either pain or suspicion. He slipped an arm around her waist. She was lighter than he expected, and half-carried, half-dragged her toward the Halcyon's broken wing. The twin suns beat down without mercy. Sand whispered against metal, and Rowan Kesh, cargo pilot with a spotless safety record until today, tried not to think about how the nearest rescue was probably weeks away day 3, and Rowan had learned exactly 2 words in Velar: water and idiot. Nyxara used the second one frequently, usually while watching him fumble with her ship's salvage technology. "Look, I'm a pilot, not an engineer," he said, holding up the device that was supposed to boost their distress beacon's range. It looked like someone had crossed a wrench with a musical instrument. "Terran tech has buttons. Lots of buttons. This doesn't even have an on switch." Nyxara, she'd managed to convey her name through an elaborate pantomime on day 2, plucked the device from his hands. Her damaged translator crackled, rendering her words in choppy Terran. "You touch, Harmony Node, with such grace of sleeping grox." "I don't know what a grox is, but I'm pretty sure you just insulted me." Her ears twitched, which he'd learned meant amusement. She twisted something on the device's side, and it hummed to life, projecting a holographic schematic that rotated gently in the air between them. She pointed at a component, then at him, then made a gesture that clearly meant don't touch. "Got it. I'll just sit here looking decorative." The translator caught enough of that to make her laugh, a sound like wind chimes that made the oppressive heat feel slightly less murderous. She set the device aside and reached for the water canteen, took a careful sip, then passed it to him. Rationing had become their unspoken religion. Their shelter was a patchwork of both ships' remains, the Halcyon's wing providing shade, hull plating from her vessel forming walls against the sand that tried to reclaim everything. At night, temperatures plummeted below freezing. During the day, the twin suns turned the desert into a kiln. They'd established a routine born of necessity. Mornings meant checking the beacon's pathetic progress. Afternoons meant scavenging, venturing out despite the heat to search for anything useful in the wreckage. Evenings meant rationing food and trying to communicate. Nyxara's translator improved incrementally. By day 5, whole sentences came through clearly, though her accent transformed Terran words into something melodic and strange. "Your people," she said one evening, using a stripped wire to sketch in the sand. "They partner how?" Rowan blinked at the question. They were sharing the last nutrition bar, something that tasted like cardboard flavored with optimism, and her shift to personal topics caught him off guard. "Oh well, we date, spend time together, argue about where to eat. Eventually someone asks the other to marry them, which is like a permanent partnership thing." So much ritual. Her ears drooped slightly, a sign he'd learned meant disapproval or confusion. Wheeler choose. If both choose, then it's chosen. That's it. No awkward dinners with parents. No arguments about living arrangements. Why argue? If you choose all parts. She paused, struggling with the translator. "You had this choosing? Before crash." "I was engaged once. Didn't work out." The memory stung less than it used to. "She chose someone else, I guess. Or chose not to choose me. Your way sounds cleaner." Nyxara made a sound that might have been sympathy. She broke off her half of the nutrition bar and handed him an extra piece. "For pain of not choosing. That's your half." "I choose to give." Her eyes met his, violet and impossible to read. "Is simple." That night, a sandstorm rolled across the desert like a living thing. They sealed themselves inside the shelter, huddled together as wind screamed and sand hissed against metal. Rowan could feel Nyxara shaking, from cold or fear. He couldn't tell. "Hey," he said, "want to hear about the time I accidentally smuggled a Rigelian pleasure toad past customs?" Her translator crackled. "What is pleasure toad?" "Well, that's the thing. I didn't know either." He told the story, embellishing shamelessly, and felt her laughter vibrate against his shoulder. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, for a moment, the universe felt slightly less hostile. When the wind finally died near dawn, they were still pressed together for warmth. Neither moved to separate. Above them, through a gap in their makeshift roof, unfamiliar stars wheeled slowly across an alien sky. Week 3 started with Nyxara collapsing face first into the sand. Rowan was 20 meters away, digging through a cargo container that had somehow remained sealed, when he heard the sound of her hitting the ground. He sprinted back, his boots kicking up rooster tails of rust-colored dust, his heart suddenly trying to escape through his throat. She was breathing, but her skin had lost its luminous quality, gone dull like tarnished metal. When he touched her forehead, the heat radiating from her made the twin suns feel temperate. No, come on." He gathered her up, surprised again by how light she was, and stumbled back toward their shelter. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and she mumbled something in Wheeler that the translator rendered as gibberish. He laid her on the makeshift bedding, parachute silk from her ship layered over sand, and tore open his medkit with shaking hands. Bandages, coagulant gel, pain suppressors calibrated for human biology. Nothing for whatever was burning through her system. Her translator sparked and died completely. "Great. Now she couldn't even tell him what was wrong. Rowan pressed a ration of water to her lips, but most of it just ran down her chin. He'd treated injuries before, broken bones, vacuum exposure, the usual hazards of cargo running. But this was so far beyond his expertise, he might as well be performing surgery with a rock. Okay, think. He forced his breathing to slow. You survived your ship exploding. You survived 3 weeks in hell. You don't get to quit on me now. He spent the next hour doing everything he could think of, cooling her skin with their precious water, checking her pulse, which raced like a damaged reactor, searching through the wreckage of her ship's medical bay for anything that looked medicinal, finding containers with labels and Velar script that might as well have been abstract art. By the time the suns reached their zenith, he was out of ideas and running on panic. That's when she started talking. Not to him, to people who weren't there. Her voice rose and fell in rapid Velar, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading. Her hands grasped at empty air. Once, she looked directly at him and said something that sounded like a question, her violet eyes unfocused and bright with fever. "I'm here," he said, knowing she couldn't understand. "I'm right here. I'm not leaving." The words felt inadequate, so he kept saying them, a mantra against the silence of the desert and the terrible helplessness crushing his chest. Night fell. He built up their small heating unit, another piece of Velar tech he'd learned to operate, and pulled her close to regulate her temperature. She shivered violently despite the fever, her whole body racked with tremors that scared him more than anything else. He must have dozed at some point, because he jerked awake to find her staring at him. "Hey," he said, relief flooding through him so intensely it hurt. "You're back. You scared the hell out of." She pressed her hand to his chest, over his heart, and her expression did something complicated. Then she passed out again. The second day was worse. She barely stirred, her breathing shallow and irregular. Rowan talked to her constantly, afraid that if he stopped, she'd slip away entirely. He told her about Earth, about cities that scraped the sky and oceans that stretched beyond sight. He described his first solo cargo run, how he'd been so nervous he'd double-checked the same calculation 17 times. He confessed that he'd always wanted to see the Velar homeworld, heard it had forests where the trees sang in storms. "So you have to pull through," he said, his voice cracking, "because you're going to take me there. That's the deal. You wake up, and I'm holding you to it." Her hand twitched, fingers brushing against his. The fever broke on the third morning. Rowan woke to find her eyes open, clear and focused. She looked exhausted, hollowed out, but alive. So impossibly alive. "Water," she whispered, and her translator, somehow functional again, rendered it perfectly. He nearly drowned her in his haste to get the canteen to her lips. She drank in small sips, wincing as if even swallowing hurt. "You didn't leave," she said after a long moment. "I wouldn't." Something shifted in her expression. She lifted her hand slowly, as if testing whether her body would obey, and placed it over his, where it rested on her shoulder. Her fingers laced between his, with deliberate care. "Rowan." His name in her voice sounded like something new. "I choose." He understood what she meant without needing translation. The Velar way. Simple and complete. "I choose too," he said. That night, after she'd slept more and eaten a little, after he'd fussed over her until she'd laughed weakly and told him to stop hovering like a worried star moth, they lay together under the foreign constellations. The desert cold pressed in, but between them was warmth. Her head rested in the hollow of his shoulder. His arm curved around her waist, careful of her healing body. Neither spoke about tomorrow or rescue or the impossibility of everything. When she turned to him, her ears brushing against his cheek, it felt inevitable, like two objects in space, caught in each other's gravity, finally colliding. There were no words after that, only breath and touch, and the feeling of two heartbeats synchronizing in the darkness. The universe contracted to the space between them. No Federation regulations, no species barriers, no futures beyond this moment. Just two people, choosing each other in a place that offered nothing but sand and stars and the defiant persistence of life. The distress beacon finally achieved full functionality on day 32, which Rowan celebrated by immediately breaking the water recycler. How? Nyxara asked, examining the sparking device with her ears tilted at an angle he'd learned meant bafflement. How do you touch machine and it simply surrenders? It's a gift, Rowan said, trying to reattach a component that had decided to become several smaller components. Back on Earth, my instructors called it catastrophic spatial awareness. This is poetry for clumsy. Basically. She laughed and took the recycler from him, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. In 10 days since the fever broke, she'd regained most of her strength, though she still tired more easily than before. Rowan had caught her pressing a hand to her stomach a few times, wincing slightly, but when he'd asked, she'd waved him off. The beacon pulsed steadily now, sending their location into the void. Rescue could come in days or weeks, no way to know. The uncertainty should have been maddening, but Rowan found himself not thinking about it much. Mostly he thought about the way Nyxara's nose crinkled when she concentrated, or how she'd started teaching him Velar phrases, laughing every time his pronunciation mangled something beautiful into something obscene, or the nights, pressed together against the cold, when talking gave way to other forms of communication entirely. Fixed, she announced, the recycler humming contentedly in her hands. She set it aside and stretched, her suit, patched with material from both ships, pulling tight across her shoulders. Then she went very still. Nyxara. She didn't respond. Her hand drifted to her abdomen, resting there with a gentle pressure. Her violet eyes widened, and her ears flattened against her skull in a way he'd never seen before. Hey, what's wrong? Rowan moved closer, alarm spiking through him. Is it the fever? Are you? No. Her voice came out strangled. No, not fever. Then what? Get bioscanner. For my ship. Medical bay. Quickly. He ran. Sand flew behind him as he sprinted to her wreckage, crawled through the twisted corridor to what remained of the medical bay, and grabbed the handheld scanner she'd shown him weeks ago. By the time he got back, she was sitting with her knees drawn up, staring at nothing. Her hand shook as she took the scanner. She pressed it against her stomach, and the device lit up, projecting a holographic readout that rotated slowly in the air. Rowan couldn't read Velar medical data, but he could see her face, the color draining from her amber skin, the way her breathing went shallow and quick. Nyxara, you're scaring me. What is it? She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw shock and fear and something else he couldn't identify. I am my body has. She struggled with the translator, frustrated sounds escaping her throat. There is no simple Terran word. Try. Pregnant. The translator settled on the word with a faint crackle. I am pregnant. The desert stopped. The wind, the settling sand, the distant cry of whatever passed for wildlife on this world, all of it ceased. Rowan's brain performed an emergency restart and came back online, with sparks flying. You're what? Velar biology operates on principles unlike human. Her words tumbled out quickly, clinically, as if reciting from a medical text could make this less impossible. Under extreme survival stress, our bodies can accelerate reproductive processes. Is evolutionary adaptation. Our homeworld was harsh, death constant. Species needed method to ensure continuation even in dire circumstances. So you're saying that we... Rowan gestured vaguely between them. And now you're... Yes. How long does? I mean, how fast does? Gestation period is approximately 40 of your days, from conception to birth. She paused, consulting the scanner again. I am 10 days along. Rowan sat down hard in the sand. Mathematics had never been his strong suit, but even he could do this calculation. 10 days ago was when she'd recovered from the fever. When they'd... Oh, the sound came out strangled, somewhere between a laugh and a choked gasp. Oh, that's... Terrifying. Nyxara supplied. I was going to say fast, but yeah, terrifying works too. They sat in silence for a moment. The twin suns beat down. The beacon pulsed its patient rhythm, and inside Nyxara, apparently, cells were dividing and organizing and creating something that shouldn't be possible. Can this even work? Rowan asked finally. I mean, you're Velar. I'm human. We're not exactly compatible species. Velar reproductive biology is adaptive, especially under stress conditions. She touched the scanner readout, her finger tracing the incomprehensible data. The genetic material merges, reconciles differences. It has happened before, in our history, when Velar encountered other species. Rarely, but it happens. So there's actually a... He couldn't finish the sentence. A child. Yes, ours. She met his eyes. Half human, half Velar. Something new. Rowan laughed. He couldn't help it. The sound burst out of him, edged with hysteria. I crashed on a desert planet. Nearly died multiple times. Fell for an alien woman. And now I'm going to be a father. In 30 days. This is... I don't even know what this is. Complicated. That's one word for it. He ran his hands through his hair, which was matted with sand and sweat and weeks of not caring. What happens when rescue comes? They'll take you back to Velar space. Me back to Earth. We're from different species, different governments, different everything. Nyxara's ears drooped slightly. I know. And there's going to be a baby. Our baby. Who's going to be what? Human? Velar? Something else entirely? I don't know. The fear in her voice cut through his panic. She looked smaller suddenly, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength. Her hand pressed against her stomach protectively. Rowan shifted closer, until their shoulders touched. Hey, we figured out how to survive here, right? We learned to communicate. We fixed a distress beacon with parts from 2 completely different ships. We can figure this out too. Can we? We have to. He took her hand, felt her fingers grip his tightly. Because I'm not letting some bureaucrat on either side of the galaxy tell us what happens next. That's our call to make. Together. Yeah, together. He squeezed her hand. Besides, if this kid inherits your engineering skills and my charm, they'll be unstoppable. Your charm. The translator caught her skeptical tone perfectly. I'm growing on you. Admit it. Her ears twitched, amusement, like fungus grows on ship hull. That's basically a declaration of love in your culture, right? She laughed, and some of the tension bled out of both of them. The impossible situation remained impossible, but somehow, sitting together in the sand with the evidence of their future glowing in holographic certainty between them, it felt slightly less terrifying. Rowan, yeah, what does this mean for us? He looked at her, really looked, at the woman who'd survived a crash and a fever and 3 weeks of hell without breaking, who laughed at his terrible jokes and fixed things he broke, and chose him when she could have chosen distance and safety. It means, he said slowly, we figure it out. No matter what happens when rescue comes, no matter what anyone says, we figure it out together. On the horizon, a dust trail rose against the dawn sky. At first, Rowan thought it was another sandstorm. Then the shape resolved, angular, metallic, descending with purpose. A ship. Nyxara saw it too. Her hand tightened in his. The beacon had worked. Rescue had arrived. And neither of them looked away from each other as the ship grew larger against the alien sky, because whatever came next, regulations, questions, the galaxy's opinion on the impossible thing they'd created, they would face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. The rescue ship bore markings from both the Terran Federation and the Velar Coalition, a joint patrol vessel, which meant bureaucracy was about to get interesting. Captain Oren Vass, a grizzled human with more scar tissue than original face, stood in their makeshift shelter looking like he'd seen everything the universe had to offer and wasn't impressed by any of it. His Velar co-captain, a stern woman named Thalera, whose ears barely moved at all, scanned their camp with clinical efficiency. You've been here 34 days, Vass said, consulting his datapad. Both ships' total losses. Remarkable you survived at all. You've been here 34 days, Vass said, consulting his datapad. Both ships' total losses. Remarkable you survived at all. We had help from each other, Rowan said. Nyxara stood close enough that their shoulders touched, a united front. Thalera's eyes lingered on Nyxara, and something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe. Or suspicion. You require immediate medical evaluation. Both of you. We're fine, Nyxara said quickly. Too quickly. Vass raised an eyebrow. Standard protocol. Non-negotiable. We've got full medical facilities on board. Then we'll sort out transport. You to Terran space. You to the Coalition. Separate ships, separate destinations. Clean and simple. Rowan felt Nyxara tense. About that, he started. There's a complication, Nyxara said simultaneously. Both captains turned their full attention on them. In the silence, the desert wind whispered against metal and sand. What kind of complication? Thalera asked. Nyxara lifted her chin, ears straightening with determination. I'm pregnant. The father is human. We're not separating. The silence that followed could have had its own gravitational field. Vass blinked, then blinked again. Excuse me? 10 days along. Vila gestation is 40 days total. Nyxara pulled out her bioscanner, displaying the data. The child is viable. Half Velar, half human. And we are choosing to remain together. Thalera's ears finally moved, flattening completely against her skull in what Rowan had learned was shock. She took the scanner, studied it, and made a sound in Velar that the translator wisely left untranslated. Vass rubbed his face. This is so far above my pay grade I can't even see my pay grade anymore. Is it illegal? Rowan asked. Illegal? No. Unprecedented? Absolutely. There are protocols for cross-species contact, but they mostly involve don't. There's certainly nothing about. He gestured vaguely at Nyxara's midsection. The child will be born in 30 days, Nyxara said firmly. I need to be somewhere stable, with proper medical care. And with Rowan. The Velar Coalition has strict citizenship laws, Thalera said, her voice carefully neutral. A human cannot simply relocate to Coalition space without years of legal process. And Terran space isn't much better for Velar, Vass added. Plus, there's the question of the child's legal status. Neither government has framework for dual-species offspring. This is going to create a political nightmare. Good, Rowan said. Both captains stared at him. Let them argue. Let them write new laws. We're not the first people to do something unprecedented. And every time it happens, the universe adjusts. It'll adjust for this too. Spoken like someone who's never dealt with Terran bureaucracy. Vass muttered. I filled out Form 2847B in triplicate once, Rowan said. I know exactly what I'm in for, and I'm saying it's worth it. Nyxara's hand found his, fingers lacing together. We survived 3 weeks on a dead planet. We'll survive paperwork. Thalera studied them both for a long moment. Then her ears twitched, barely, but it was there. Amusement. The child will need specialized care. Neither Terran nor Velar medical facilities are equipped for hybrid biology. So we find somewhere neutral, Rowan said. A research station. Somewhere with expertise in xenobiology. Station Meridian, Nyxara said suddenly. Independent station, joint scientific venture. Near the border between our territories. They have advanced medical facilities and xenobiologists from 12 species. Vass consulted his datapad, scrolling through data. Meridian Station does have the facilities, and they're specifically set up for cross-cultural cooperation. It's not a permanent solution, but for the birth and immediate aftermath. He looked at Thalera. The Velar captain's ears tilted thoughtfully. I can contact the station director. Request temporary residence for medical purposes. That sidesteps the citizenship issue in the short term. And long term? Rowan asked. Long term, you'll have to navigate 2 governments who are going to have opinions about this child. Vass's expression softened slightly. But if you're serious about making this work, Meridian's probably your best shot. They're used to the complicated cases. We're definitely a complicated case, Nyxara said. You crashed on a desert planet and fell in love. That's either the universe's idea of a joke or a terrible romance novel, Vass said. Personally, I'm betting on both. The journey to Meridian Station took 3 days. The rescue ship's medical officer, a Centauran with 6 arms and a pathological need to run tests, examined Nyxara thoroughly and declared the pregnancy proceeding normally, whatever normal meant in this context. Fascinating cellular adaptation, Dr. Zethal said, all 6 hands manipulating various instruments. The genetic material has merged remarkably well. Velar adaptive biology is compensating for human incompatibilities. I'd like to write a paper on this. Can we read it first? Rowan asked. Of course. You're the primary sources. Zethal peered at the scanner. The child shows characteristics of both species. Bone structure more human, neural development more velar. Ear structure intermediate, not as pronounced as full velar, but present. Nyxara's hand tightened on Rowan's. And prognosis. Excellent. I see no reason this pregnancy won't proceed to a healthy birth, though I recommend you remain on Meridian for at least 3 months post-delivery. The child will need monitoring. 3 months of station food, Rowan said. I've had station food. Better than nutrient packs, Nyxara pointed out. Barely. Meridian Station hung in space like a wheel of light against the void, spinning gently to create artificial gravity. Ships from a dozen species docked at its spokes. The station director, a kindly human woman named Dr. Reeves, met them personally. We've prepared quarters in the medical wing, she said, leading them through corridors bustling with activity. Researchers from species Rowan couldn't identify hurried past with equipment and datapads. You'll have privacy, but medical staff will be on call. We're all very excited, actually. This is exactly the kind of situation Meridian was built for. Excited seems like a strong word, Rowan said. You're creating a bridge between 2 species, Dr. Reeves said simply. That's significant. It means something. Their quarters were small but comfortable, 2 rooms, a medical monitoring station, and a viewport showing the stars wheeling past. Nyxara sat on the bed, her hand unconsciously resting on her stomach. Are you scared? Rowan asked, sitting beside her. Terrified, she admitted. In 30 days, less now, we'll have a child. Something unprecedented. Everyone will be watching, judging, analyzing. They can watch all they want. Rowan covered her hand with his. We'll be too busy figuring out diapers. Do velar babies need diapers? Yes, unfortunately. So we're equally doomed. That's comforting. She laughed, leaning against him. Through the viewport, a velar transport passed, its elegant curves catching starlight. Beyond it, a bulky Terran freighter lumbered past. 2 different designs, 2 different philosophies, sharing the same space. We're going to be okay, Nyxara said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Rowan agreed. We really are. 29 days later, Rowan paced outside the medical bay while Dr. Zethal and a team of specialists worked inside. Velar births were apparently faster than human ones, which meant he'd only been pacing for 3 hours instead of the 12 or more he'd been dreading. Still felt like forever. Dr. Reeves sat nearby, watching him wear a path in the floor. First child who's half alien and the result of a desert survival situation? Yeah, definitely the first. You're going to be fine. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. The medical bay door opened. Dr. Zethal emerged, all 6 arms moving in gestures Rowan had learned meant excitement. Healthy delivery. Mother and daughter are both stable. Daughter. Rowan's brain caught on the word and held it like a lifeline. Can I? Of course. Nyxara lay propped on the medical bed, looking exhausted and radiant and more beautiful than anything Rowan had ever seen. In her arms, wrapped in a thermal blanket, was something impossibly small. Hey, he said, his voice breaking on the word. Come meet your daughter, Nyxara said softly. Rowan crossed the room on legs that forgot how to work properly. The baby, his daughter, had Nyxara's amber skin, lighter but unmistakable. Dark hair like his. And ears, delicate points that were smaller than full velar, but definitely there, twitching slightly. She's perfect, he whispered. She has your nose, Nyxara said. Poor kid. Nyxara laughed softly and shifted, making room for him on the bed. He sat carefully, afraid to jostle either of them, and when Nyxara placed the baby in his arms, the weight of her, small and warm and real, made everything else in the universe fade to background noise. What do we name her? He asked. I was thinking. Nyxara hesitated. Zirith. After the planet where we found each other. Zirith. Rowan tested the name. The baby's eyes opened, violet like her mother's, and seemed to focus on his face. Zirith Kesh. Or is it Zirith? What's your family name? Nyxara Velmoth. But Kesh Velmoth works. Hyphenated. Compromise. Zirith Kesh Velmoth. Kid's going to have to learn to spell early. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like she was testing out her voice. Her tiny hand, so impossibly tiny, wrapped around Rowan's finger with surprising strength. Hello, Zirith, he said. Welcome to the universe. Fair warning, it's complicated and weird, and sometimes it tries to kill you. But your mom and I are going to make sure you're okay. That's a promise. 3 months later, Rowan stood at the viewport in their expanded quarters, Zirith asleep against his shoulder. The baby had grown, developing a personality that seemed to involve waking up precisely when her parents had just fallen asleep and finding new ways to be adorable and terrifying simultaneously. Nyxara joined him, slipping an arm around his waist. Station director approved our residency extension. How long? Indefinitely. As long as we want. They've offered me a position in engineering, and they're interested in hiring you for their cargo coordination division. So we're staying. Is that okay? Rowan looked down at his daughter, then at Nyxara, then out at the stars where ships from every corner of known space came and went, carrying people and cargo and stories between worlds. Yeah, he said. I think that's exactly right. Zirith stirred, making the small, contented sounds that meant she was dreaming. Whatever she saw in those dreams, whether in Velar or human or some hybrid language all her own, Rowan hoped it was good things. The Terran Federation and Velar Coalition would eventually write their new laws, create frameworks for hybrid children and cross-species families. Other couples would follow, because the universe had a way of expanding to accommodate the impossible once someone proved it could be done. But that was future policy and distant bureaucracy. Right now, Rowan had everything that mattered. A woman he loved who'd chosen him. A daughter who existed because two people refused to let the universe's indifference define their limits. And a home on a station that lived between worlds, where complicated was just another word for interesting. I love you, he said to Nyxara. I love you too, she replied. Then she added, even though you still break every piece of equipment you touch. That's basically my superpower. Our daughter will probably inherit it. Then we'll just have to teach her to fix things like her mother. Through the viewport, the stars turned. Ships came and went, and in the quiet of their quarters, 3 hearts beat in different rhythms that somehow made a harmony all their own. The desert was 40 days and half a galaxy behind them. But everything that mattered, everything they'd chosen, everything they'd built, everything they'd promised each other under Alien Suns, was right here. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The end.